Welcome back to the Mental Health and Wellbeing Global Summit. I'm Lynn Brick, co-founder of the John W. Brick Mental Health Foundation, and I'm here with Doctors Julia Rucklidge and Bonnie Kaplan. Julia Rucklidge is a professor of clinical psychology at the University of Canterbury and the director of the Puna Toyota. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Not bad. Te Puna Toyota.
Oh, thank you. The Mental Health and Nutrition Research Lab. Co-author of The Better Brain, she has become well known for her research investigating the interface between nutrition and mental health, having published over 150 empirical papers and been the recipient of numerous local and international awards and frequently featured in the media for her work. Her 2014 TEDx talk has been viewed close to 5 million times, and congratulations on that. It is wonderful. Julie is passionate about challenging the current medical paradigm and dominates our understanding of psychiatric problems with the goal of raising awareness of how our food environment is a significant contributor to poor mental health. Dr. Bonnie Kaplan is professor emeritus in the Cumming School of Medicine at the University of Calgary. She has published widely on the contribution of nutrition to mental health. Her efforts include nutrition knowledge in the care of people with mental health challenges, has earned her a variety of awards. The Dr. Rogers Prize selection as one of 150 Canadian difference makers in mental health, and the top 7 over 70 in Calgary. Congratulations. Her book, The Better Brain, was written with Professor Julia Rucklidge. Her goal is to influence the way mental health treatment is delivered. She is also on the scientific advisory board of the John W. Brick Mental Health Foundation, and thank you so much for that as well. So, Julia and Bonnie, thank you so much for being here. It's so great to see you today. Now, you know, the focus of this summit is getting more holistic, meaning mind, body, spirit approaches to improving mental health and well-being, not only to healthcare professionals, but to the general public as well. And I'd love to start by asking you some questions and to share a little bit more about each of your backgrounds, especially your research. Well, I'll start with you, Julia.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me on the summit. It's always a delight to be able to share this knowledge with more people and your audience. So my background, as you said in the introduction, is in clinical psychology. So I trained at the University of Calgary, so it's no coincidence that Bonnie and I are here together. That is where we met when I first started my master's with Bonnie in 1993. So 30 years ago, Bonnie.
Wow.
And so I did my master's and PhD, not on nutrition. It was on, actually, my PhD ended up being on looking at the effects, or just generally, I can't even remember, yes, I probably can't remember, gender effects in ADHD, particularly looking at the psychosocial effects of having ADHD on women. So, but while I was doing my PhD, Bonnie, and this is sort of part of her story, so I won't take too much of it away, but was approached by some families in southern Alberta, Canada, who were using nutrients to treat very serious mental health disorders. So I heard about it while I was doing my PhD. To be honest, didn't pay much attention, particularly because my education at that stage and at that point was that nutrition was just generally irrelevant to brain health and in treating psychiatric disorders. And so it just didn't fit with my model. So it often doesn't it bounces off. It doesn't even necessarily come into your awareness. I moved on, and did a postdoc at the Hospital for Sick Children, and then moved to New Zealand in 2000, where I took up a job teaching child clinical psychology at the University of Canterbury. Bonnie came out here and shared some of her early research with us in New Zealand. And at that point, when I sat there and listened, I was like, you know what, this is actually really quite interesting. And so after probably a few years of persuasion, I eventually thought, you know what, we're not doing very well right now in terms of treating psychiatric disorders. Medications have their downsides. Psychotherapy can be unreachable for many, and not everyone gets better with those treatments. So why not be the critic and conscience of society, which is what academics are supposed to be, and study a new idea, even if it contravenes current way of thinking. So I started launching into trials, observed similar things to what Bonnie had been observing around the benefits of vitamins and minerals in pill form in helping people overcome really serious mental health issues. And so I have been doing that kind of research ever since, for the last 15 years, doing clinical trials and with various different challenges.
Well, thank you for that. Bonnie?
Well, I don't have a lot to add. It's real fascinating, actually, to hear Julia describe those early days. I certainly felt the same way. When I first heard about families who believed that their serious mental illness, I mean, hallucinations, delusions, bipolar disorder, were getting better by taking vitamins and minerals, I just didn't believe it. We are all the products of our education. That's the lesson here. And we were all taught that vitamins and minerals were, what is the adjective that always used? They're just vitamins and minerals, a trivializing attitude. And that's been going on really since World War II, that just eat a balanced diet, dairy, and you'll just be fine. And that is not the case. We know so much more now. So I launched into some research when I could, went over to New Zealand to convince Julia. But what I'm doing now, because I retired in 2016, retired in the sense that I write and lecture, but I don't run studies. I'm not located in a research environment anymore. But I'm spending a lot of my time trying to convince people to make a place at the table for nutrition when talking about mental health treatment programs. And I'm speaking to policymakers and government people, et cetera. Haven't gotten real far yet, Lynn, but keep chipping away at it. And our book really was generated out of both of our frustrations that the general public isn't being taught either. And as I said, all of us are simply the product of our education. This should be part of their education.
Well, thank you so much for that. And congratulations to both of you on your amazing book. I love it. And you're speaking words that are just they resound so well with myself. And we do have to share this knowledge with the rest of the world, especially medical practitioners and mental health coaches and people that really are working with people that have some serious mental health issues. And I love so many things that you mentioned, especially not that you mentioned, but Dr. Weil in his introduction to both of you, and you're in the book, and he clearly states that medical practitioners are not really given any guidance at all on how to discuss nutrition with their patients. And I just think that this is a message that we need to resound loud and clear to everyone throughout the world. So thank you for that. Julia, what are some of the other ways that nutrition affects brain development and that further mental wellness?
Sure. So I was thinking about this question and how to approach it, because I'm not a developmental psychologist, so we haven't followed people over time. But then I thought, well, actually, what we have done is that we have studied the effects of vitamins and minerals, mostly in pill form at this stage, although I'm starting to think about doing some other types of studies. But we have looked at it in different populations. And so we've looked at the importance of additional vitamins and minerals during pregnancy. And so we've just finished a really large study looking at the importance of additional nutrients, not just for the mother's mental health during pregnancy, for which we've seen some really strong benefits, but also for that early start of life. Bonnie might say not surprised, but I have to say that we were a little surprised, or we were excited that we showed that additional vitamins and minerals aren't harmful to the infant in terms of looking at their birth outcomes. They're at term, they have really healthy weight when they've been given additional nutrients, and they have a really good start to life. They just seem more regulated based on the research that we've done. And but I guess the part that is exciting for us is that up until then, until we did the study, there were no studies that had been done that looked at a higher than your normal nutrient dose. So there's been studies looking at your typical supermarket type of nutrient formula, but not at the doses that we have been studying. So it was really reassuring that there were no adverse effects, because we couldn't reassure the moms during the pregnancy that there weren't going to be any adverse effects because there hadn't been any research. So it's really it's good that there were no identified risks in our sample. Of course, it needs to now be replicated with further research, but that's really a great step to the start of life, is to make sure that mom is really well nourished. And there's also research that shows that the more that she eats a diet that is consisting mostly of whole foods and your fruits and vegetables, your legumes, your healthy fats, your fish, etc., that her infant is going to have a better start to life compared to infants who are exposed to the Western style diet. So there's this converging evidence that is showing how important it is to get it right at the beginning. And then we move on into some of the studies that have done with children and adolescents, and making sure that they have additional nutrients and what they're getting out of even what they might be called this good diet, whatever that is, the healthy diet, which I think we can certainly talk a lot more about, but just showing how important it is for their particularly emotional regulation to have those additional nutrients. And so in terms of thinking about the benefits from a perspective of prevention of, say, ongoing even aggression or engagement in criminal activities, those types of behaviors that are really problematic for societies around the world, showing that adequately nourishing the brain can have an influence over time on those particularly difficult behaviors is really exciting. Because at the end of the day, it really is quite a simple intervention that can be rolled out quite broadly and easily, as long as we have the support of the medical community as well as governments. So I hope that gives you a bit of I hope I've answered your question. I don't know if Bonnie, you wanted to add anything else there, but that's sort of my thoughts on it when I was reflecting on it.
Anything to add, Bonnie?
No, I think that was very complete.
It's wonderful. And I've actually heard of research that's been done, not just for the maternal preparatory of life for her unborn child, but also 6 months prior to conception for not just the woman, but also the man, to help to make assure that the child has a healthy kickstart before there's even conception. So
well, exactly. And it also speaks to we need to really shift from treating people when they have disease to trying to ensure that they are resilient, such that they lower their risk of developing disease in the first place. And we know that that's so important when it comes to physical health. And what we're really trying to continue to sort of increase exposure to is the idea that this is really relevant to the brain as well. That proactive we need prevention. We need to be shifting far more to prevention than intervention.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Thank you. Bonnie, you've long studied the role of nutrition in mental illness. What can you tell us about the importance of nutrition in mental illness and well-being?
When I teach about the kinds of evidence that we have, I go over correlational data, prospective longitudinal data, and treatment data. We've kind of touched just now on the treatment approach, and prevention is what Julia brought out too. But I think maybe I'll answer this in terms of the prospective data, because we have some studies, and these are not Julia's or mine. They've come from other parts of the world, but several of them have shown that you can actually predict the risk of a mental disorder emerging based on how the person was eating prior to that time. So, for example, the Canadian study in that category took children who were in the 5th grade and evaluated them for 9 health behaviors. Oh, you'll like this, Lynn, because one of the 9 was exercise, okay? And 2 were on screen time, but 6 of them were dietary. And you can guess that, following government guidelines for their dietary intake, eating their fruits and their veggies, etc. Okay, so 6 of the 9 health behaviors were, in fact, dietary. And what they did is they evaluated over 3,000 children at that age in the 5th grade. And then they went away and they came back a few years later and pulled their health records and asked the question, I should have said, none of those children at baseline had any apparent mental or behavioral disorder. Okay. So then when they came back, they pulled the medical records and could see who had been referred to usually a pediatrician for diagnosis and treatment of a mental or behavioral disorder. And then they had this subgroup that had been referred, and they asked the question, well, did anything that we had studied back when they were a few years ago in the 5th grade, did anything predict that vulnerability? And yes, it was a linear relationship with the number of health behaviors that they were following. And so for the children who have been following 7, 8, or 9 of the 9 guidelines, so that would have been dietary and screen time and exercise, those children had about half the probability of having a mental or behavioral health problem emerge just 3 years later. So, look at what we could be doing for our children in terms of overall, I don't know what you want to call it, integrative health, lifestyle medicine, or to use the mind, body, spirit terminology that we use at the Brick Foundation. But we could be preventing an awful lot of suffering and also saving a lot of money. They did a cost benefit. They did a costing analysis. And for every additional guideline met, there was a 15% decrease in probability of risk, probability of needing medical treatment. So you can assign a dollar amount to that depending on where you live, right? So suffering, finances, you name it, we could be preventing a lot of it. And the other studies that come from Spain and from Japan, et cetera, they all, and also Australia, they all show that same phenomenon.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. And I love the fact that the book that both of you wrote, The Better Brain, it's chock full of so much research and information and examples of real life situations. Like there's an example of a child who was hospitalized and hallucinatory, and just by simply giving him the proper nutrients, he improved. And what you talk about cost saving when you can provide proper nutrition as one of the means to improve mental well-being, that's phenomenal. So thank you so much to both of you for sharing so much information in your wonderful book. Now, Julia, how is our food environment a significant contributor to poor mental health? I know you talked about this in detail in your TEDx talk, and congratulations on your amazing talk. It is phenomenal, and I highly recommend that all of our listeners please tune in to the TEDx to listen to your talk. But can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Sure. Well, I suspect your listeners know that our food environment has changed the most dramatically in human evolution over the last 100 years. And so we have the introduction of foods that we have not evolved to be able to digest or utilize. And I don't know if that will ever happen. Although some people do talk about how we might evolve one day to be able to deal with these products, but I'd be slightly surprised about that. So we have the introduction of what's being generally labeled as ultra-processed products. And these are pervasive in our supermarkets in New Zealand. The data show that 69% of the foods that are sold in supermarkets are of the ultra-processed variety, and that will be similar in other parts of the world. And so it's this rapid change in our food environment that is exposing us to more sugar than we've ever been exposed to, that we have such easy access to not just it's the refined sugar. It's just that sugar molecule rather than consuming the sugar within the context of, say, eating a an orange or other types of fruits that will have natural sugars in them. So we're getting this absolute massive hit of sugar, which is evolutionary important for us to have some in certain cases, particularly in cases of fight or flight, where we need extra glucose to help us get away from danger. But we're consuming it in such a huge amount now that, of course, we now know the detrimental effects of that is that it's leading to all of these chronic health issues that we're currently faced with, like obesity and diabetes, but also and cardiovascular problems and cancers, but also, of course, mental health problems as well. So we've got, and then in addition to that, we have the foods have got food colors and additives and emulsifiers and all kinds of things that are there to improve the shelf life and, to be honest, to improve the profit of the food industry, because their foods then last longer. And so that increases their opportunity for profit. And but the research is showing that these foods are really quite detrimental to our health, and we need to go back to what our ancestors were eating, which is your real whole foods. So I don't know if that kind of introduces the rapid change in our environment and really now an acknowledgement, I think, by so many scientists and hopefully policymakers as well, that this is something that we need to address. But it's such a huge problem and it's so pervasive, and there's so much power in the industry to keep these foods on the shelf. I mean, even right now, I worry about the way plant-based has been captured by the ultra-processed food industry. You look at some of these, the fake burgers, and that's an attempt to try to, capture those consumers who are worried about eating meat because of the environmental impacts. But they're being replaced by these foods that are produced in a factory, have a high carbon footprint, are not nutritious. They're depleted in nutrients. And yet we're seeing this as being a reasonable way to deal with the climate change crisis. So I think we need to be really mindful of that, some of the messaging that's going on at the moment that certainly concerns me.
I agree 100%. Bonnie, did you have something to add to that about the environment?
No, it's just interesting. If we could just turn people toward the agricultural side, and so they would, I don't think people think where that plant-based diet is coming from. And so they're willing to have it be chemicalized and so forth. But if they understood how plants grow and how they feed us, that could change. Yeah,
absolutely. As you mentioned, Julia, the soil that our plants and fruits and vegetables and all of our plant-based foods are growing now has completely shifted and changed. And over the years, it's pretty unbelievable. And also the way that we absorb our food has shifted and changed as well. And you think this possibly is not only contributing to mental health issues, but also to increased number of allergies and other kinds of disease entities that have just cropped up over the last 20 to 30 years. Do you think that there's some kind of contribution to that as well?
Right. Bonnie, can you speak to that?
Well, I think that it's all because of the chemical exposure. I mean, there's so many anecdotes of people who completely changed their lives to healthy food, and immunologic problems decrease without a doubt. So I'm sure that is true. It's not our area of expertise. Neither one of us is an immunologist, so I won't say anything more about that, except this. The one thing that worries me about these alternative ways of growing food is people who are growing food in water, hydroponics. We have to scrutinize what they're putting into the water. If you don't understand that plants have to absorb roughly 15 minerals from the soil or the water in order to synthesize the vitamins that our brains are dependent on, then you might think, oh, look, the plant's growing in the water, and all I did was add calcium, or I don't know, one or two. And that's really a problem. Who's looking at that? Who's looking at the content, the mineral content of the water that's being used for hydroponics? Because there are all these new indoor gardens that are cropping up, and I don't know, is there any kind of regulation? Probably not yet.
Very good question. Very good question. Yes, because it does seem that the environmentalists are looking at alternative ways to help improve the environment, and yet our foods, and all of us are suffering.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. So, Bonnie, is there a difference between getting nutrients in the foods people eat versus nutritional supplements? And can you share some of the issues that people should be thinking about when focusing on nutrients and mental health when it comes to foods versus supplementation?
Sure. This is a very big question, but I'll try to be concise. It is better to get all of your nutrients from healthy foods, but I don't think any of us can right now. And one of the reasons it's the best way to do it has to do with the different categories of nutrients. Julie and I have studied minerals and vitamins mostly, and we call those micronutrients. And of course, there's also a large literature on the essential fatty acids, the omega-3s. And everybody knows about the amino acids, which are building blocks of protein, which aren't usually a problem in our societies. People get enough protein. But very little knowledge is out there yet about the phytonutrients. There are literally thousands of phytonutrients, thousands. I don't think all of them have names yet. I know that not all of them have been studied yet in terms of what they do for us. But a few of the ones that your listeners will have heard of are things like lycopene, or some of the phytonutrients that create the purple and red colors in beets and blueberries, etc. Those are not amino acids or vitamins or minerals, or they are a general category of plant nutrients, which is what phyto means. And so Mother Nature has figured out how to package those in plants that are grown in healthy soil, so that when we eat the plants to get our vitamins and minerals, we're getting appropriate phytonutrients. But I don't think we really know how to replace that with supplements. In the last part of your question, you used a phrase that I hear a lot, food versus supplements. If you get as far as chapter 12, the end of our book, Our Vision for the Future, you'll learn that we talk about being food first people. So far, neither one of us has studied a whole diet. Sounds like Julia might be headed that way. But we really don't have as a goal putting everybody on pills. But it's in a way a proof of principle. And it has certainly been very helpful in understanding the kinds of symptoms that we can improve in people who take a broad spectrum supplement formula. But if you follow the logic step by step, what we really suggest is let's improve regenerative agriculture to enrich our soil, to have healthier soil, feeding our plants, which can then use the minerals and create our vitamins. And then let's all of us choose to eat real food. That's an enormous step. Beyond that, yes, there is a place for micronutrients anyway in pill form, and also essential fatty acids, especially if you're not eating fish. And so that's what our research has shown, is that they can be very beneficial for mood regulation, the micronutrients in pill form, and then exercise and psychotherapy and so forth, and social support and all of that. And then at the very end, medication may have a place for some people, psychiatric meds. That should be seen as the supplement. That's why I try not to call micronutrients in pill form. I try not to call them a supplement. The medication in my ideal world would be a potential supplement for some people. So that's why I don't think about food versus supplements. I think about food and then sometimes micronutrients in pill form and omega-3s and so forth.
I love it. Thank you. And I love how you position not only foods and supplementation, but also medication for people that are suffering with some kind of mental illness. It's just like the last line of defense, is what I'm hearing you say. It may be appropriate for some people. It just depends. Everybody is different, and there's not a one size fits all when it comes to nutrition and supplementation too. So yeah, yes, of course.
May I add one thing to that? This is something that I sometimes forget to say, but a large number of people who are listening to what we're talking about are going to be people who are taking medication or are using medication with their children. And I don't think anyone should ever feel guilty for doing that. People are trying to find the thing which will help them get through every day. And if medication is the pathway that works best for them, they should feel comfortable with that. Maybe they can decrease the dose of medication they need if they improve their dietary intake. But it's a reality for some people. It's also a reality to use in a crisis. I mean, every child, I think, that goes into an emergency room in a severe anxiety state or something is given a sedative, and that's necessary for a day or two to get them to calm down, to be able to figure out what's going on. So it will always be a place for medication. Our pharmaceutical companies are not going out of business, and the older I get, the happier I am with that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I hear you. And I'm hearing you say it's about integrating all these modalities together. And that's so critical and important. I'd love for both of you, for our listeners, to explain what are whole foods and also what are macro and micronutrients. Can you just diverge into those, answering those questions? Just very
go ahead, Julie. You want to do some definitions? Yeah,
sure. So real whole foods, as we described in the book anyway, we stuck with mostly the research that's being done on the Mediterranean diet, and that's because there's the most research on the Mediterranean diet when it comes to mental health. So there's been randomized controlled trials that have supported people to eat more consistent with that kind of diet. And so what does it mean? That's meaning high in your fruits and vegetables, high in your legumes, your whole grains. Some meat is generally included in the diets that have been studied. Fish, nuts, some dairy, and then of course some opportunity for things that may not have any nutritional value in terms of micronutrients, but that they bring pleasure. And we need to we can't forget that food, for the most part, is about making sure that we nourish our brains and our bodies, but that sometimes they can just be for the pleasure of it. But that you do that that's not your mainstay of how you eat, which is unfortunately what's happened. The data show that at a population level, Americans and Canadians are getting over half of their calories from these foods that we would see as being more discretionary items as opposed to being your main way of eating. I'd encourage people not to fret over am I getting the right number of serves? Because if you're eating whole foods, you're probably getting there in terms of making sure that you're getting an adequate amount of calories. We don't talk about calories in the book. We don't talk about calorie counting because if you're eating real whole foods, you tend not to overeat. You don't hear about that happening with that people ate so many oranges that, I don't know, they keeled over with some kind of a challenge. So that just doesn't happen. Whereas you have that with your potato chips and your donuts, that people can tend to overeat those foods. So
I was so those foods that are fake, frivolous, and fabricated.
Yeah.
Oh,
what did you call them? Baked?
Fake, frivolous, and fabricated.
Okay. Yes, there you go.
I like that.
And we can overeat those. Macronutrients are what most people think of when they think about their food, which is your fats, your carbohydrates, and your proteins. And those can be, the thing is that you can get fats and carbs and proteins from your ultra-processed products. And so, unfortunately, marketing is all about telling you what's in the food, so that there's you might see low in fat or high in carbs, depending on whether or not we're trying to encourage people to go keto or carnivore or whatever. So there's a lot of marketing towards that, and also the food labels emphasize the fats, carbs, and proteins. The micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals particularly. And if you look at food labels, there's not a lot of information about your vitamins and minerals on there. And if there is, there might be 3 or 4 listed, and they'll tell it to you relative to what's called the recommended dietary allowance or the daily value, or there's different terms that are used. But I think most people are familiar with RDA because it's on your supplement. So when you buy a 1 a day, you'll see the RDA. And it's unfortunately, the RDA hasn't kept up with science. And so we're using values that are quite outdated and don't reflect the brain's needs. It might reflect what your other organs might need, but not the brain. And knowing that the brain is your hungriest organ, you would think the RDA should reflect what that hungriest organ actually needs to consume to perform optimally. So the RDAs are often they're listed on the packages, and they're very low, often very low values. Like you might get 5% of your vitamin D by consuming this, or 1% of vitamin E, and it's because the packaging is really emphasizing the calories, the fats, proteins, and carbohydrates, less so of these micronutrients. It suggests that the micronutrients somehow are not that valuable, and we shouldn't really care about that as much. And if we really think about what the micronutrients are doing for brain health and the importance of them for supporting all the activity, metabolic activity that's happening in your brain, you really do sort of realize that we need to be flipping that and thinking more about the micronutrient content. And the fats and carbs and proteins will follow, in that they are contained in all of your real whole foods.
Beautiful. Anything else to add there, Bonnie?
No, I think that's a very complete answer.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Bonnie. Better than Chat GPT. I wonder
right.
I wonder what Chat GPT would say.
No.
All right. So for both of you, changing a diet or starting a supplementation routine can be pretty daunting for most people. And in your book, The Better Brain, you offer ideal diets and mood-boosting recipes, and that they're fantastic, as well as advice on when to supplement and how, and when it comes to eating a special diet. So where can people start? It's like that huge elephant. Where should they take their first bite to kind of understand more about nutrition and brain health?
I'll start with something there, Julia, if you don't mind. Lately, what I've been saying to people is maybe it's time that we focus on the positive. So this goes back to how we got a lot of people to start eating some vegetarian meals by saying, just Monday night, make vegetarian 1 night a week and go from there. Same thing here. Try one meal that's all whole, healthy foods, and just work the whole healthy foods into your diet. And as you do that, the donuts will kind of go away. So if you're filling up on healthy foods a bit more, then a lot of that other stuff will go away. And I want to re-emphasize a statistic that Julia presented, because to me, it is the most horrific, upsetting thing that I've read in decades on nutrition and our society. And this comes from, I'm going to quote the NHANES data from the U.S. government, Kaplan. NHANES has been around since 1971. NHANES stands for National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. It's a mouthful, but they collect information about how Americans are eating, and they do that every couple of years, and the data are managed in some big computer somewhere, and scientists go to them and say, I want to use the latest NHANES data to answer this question, and I want to evaluate that question, and that's how we get publications on NHANES data. And in the last year, what we've learned is that 2/3 of the caloric intake of American children up to the age of 19, 2/3 comes from the ultra-processed commercial empty calorie rubbish, which has no micronutrients. So let that sink in for a minute. We have a couple of generations of kids who have already learned that when you eat, it has to be a treat, right? And now we're finding out that they have learned it so well that 2/3 of what they are consuming is not feeding their brain. Has there ever been in the history of humanity this kind of impact of children not feeding their brains and being down to 1/3 of what they should be consuming? This is really very profound to me. By the way, adults weren't much better. It was 57% instead of 67%. So parents out there, you need to start introducing more and more whole foods for your whole families. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Julia, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's pretty much hit it around.
Fantastic. Yes.
Yeah. And
Okay.
of course, the other things we said in the interview. Food first.
Absolutely. So in the book, you discuss overcoming anxiety, combating depression, and reducing ADHD and stress with nutrition. Now, can you tell us a bit more about your fabulous book and this groundbreaking research?
Okay, so gosh, how much time do we have left for this one? This question, Lynn. I'll talk about one of my favorite studies has to do with stress, and it was within the context of natural disasters that happened in our city in 2010, 2011 in Christchurch. And that was a whole bunch of series of very severe earthquakes that had detrimental effect in terms of lives and the infrastructure and buildings falling down and collapsing, and really just huge disruption to our lives here. The one that was, I think, the best study in terms of what you can really take away from it was one that I did really early on. I can even remember having this conversation with Bonnie back in September 2010. What should I do? I'm at home and the university's closed. What kind of study can we do to sort of help inform around the importance of nutrition for stress? And so what I ended up doing was taking people who were currently enrolled in our studies. And so we had information about how their stress levels and anxiety and depression were prior to the earthquake. And then it just happened that some of them were taking micronutrients at the time of the September earthquake, which was a 7.1 earthquake. So it was a magnitude around similar to what's happened in Turkey recently. I think that would be around the same. And then we had some who happened to not be taking these additional micronutrients. And what we found was that people get anxious after an earthquake, and stressed. It's a very incredibly stressful event, and particularly are all the aftershocks. So there's this just constant retriggering of the flight response. So there's so much uncertainty and lack of control over your environment. But what we found were that people who had those additional nutrients were more resilient. So they overcame the stress response far more quickly than people who had fewer nutrients available to them. So what that speaks to is, again, what we've been talking about earlier, which is around prevention, is that you don't know when you're going to be faced with a stressor. And they can happen upon us so quickly. Think about how quickly everything happened around COVID-19, going into lockdowns, or the floods that are happening. We've just had these cyclones going through the North Island. And so they can happen so quickly. So our best preparedness, and we talk a lot about cities being prepared and having, prepared around the infrastructure. We need to also be talking about the population being prepared in terms of resilience. And if those studies, that study showed was that additional nutrients supported you in being more resilient and less stressed. And we know that means that you're going to be, the research shows that you're more likely to be action oriented and want to do things about things like climate change. Then we've really got to emphasize that at a population level about making sure that people are adequately nourished before the stressor happens. So I often say jokingly, Well, this research shows that if you're going to be in an earthquake, make sure you take micronutrients right before that. So, and of course, we can't predict that. So it means that we need to be looking at, we don't wait for the event to happen. We don't wait for the mental illness to develop. What we do is that we make sure that our lives incorporate every single day behaviors that are going to support us and nourish us rather than to inadequately prepare us for what's in our future. So that's the story of stress. I mean, we've got a lot more studies that we then followed on after the earthquake, after a flood. I collaborated with Bonnie after a flood in 2013, after a mosque shooting here in Christchurch in 2019. So we've got a lot of this sort of cumulative evidence showing the importance of nutrients for supporting people with stress. But I always think that study, to me, was the most valuable in terms of the lessons that it taught us. And then, briefly, there's lots of studies that we've also done, not just in my lab, but internationally at ADHD, such that the level of evidence now is that it's at the same level of evidence as pharmaceuticals, using a broad spectrum of nutrients for the treatment of ADHD symptoms. So I don't know if I feel like I could keep going on, but I just think that I hope that story at least captured some of the essence of where we'd like to go around what you can take away from this massive body of research is not wait for the development of the difficulty, but to try to prevent it in the first place.
Absolutely. Don't wait for the crisis. Proactive prevention is what I'm hearing you say. That's very, very compelling. And Bonnie, anything else to add to that? I know that it was a loaded question. Research about depression?
Yeah, no, I would like to just add one thing about resilience. I get very frustrated sometimes. I imagine Julia does too, reading article after article, study after study, saying, "Oh, our kids are so stressed. Oh, life is so stressful. Oh, there's so much mental disorder. Oh, they need so much help." And I get people asking me, "Well, life is just more stressful now, right?" And here's my answer: no, it is not. My parents and grandparents lived through World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, the flu epidemic of 1917. I mean, these are all the Holocaust, the Dutch hunger winter. These are all part of my memory. Hearing these stories growing up, life was horrible then. And they were rarely in touch with their families because they were the people who moved to North America and had no internet, right? And no FaceTime, and no WhatsApp. And so they were doing it on their own. Life was more stressful then. What has changed is resilience. And that's what Julia really just illustrated so well, is if our brains are not resilient to stressors that are out there, they're always going to be stressors. They're always going to be all of these problems. But we have to build up, as you said, Lynn, preventatively, build up our resilience and our brain health.
Love it. Love it. And I know in your book, you also mention that it's not just about taking one particular type of micronutrient. It's about a broad spectrum. For our listeners, can you just explain what you mean by broad spectrum?
Julia?
It's the full array of vitamins and minerals that your brain needs every day to function. And so in the book, we talk about that as being about 30 vitamins and minerals. So that's your zinc, your iodine, your selenium, your potassium, your B vitamins. B vitamins, particularly important with the stress response. But I don't want to undermine the importance of the minerals as well, because we know that they're important too. But there's been a lot of research on the B vitamins specifically for stress. So there's nothing special. We don't think there's a single nutrient. There are lucky people out there, the lucky few who do respond with just one nutrient. But it's actually, the research shows that it's pretty modest effect, that it's really the broad array that seems to have the bigger impact. But I also acknowledge what Bonnie said earlier, is that we are missing in these supplements is things like the things that you can't put into a pill that exist in our foods, like the phytonutrients.
Right. So, as you also very poignantly pointed out in your book, there is no magic bullet. That's very true. Thank you so much. And I'm just curious, for our audience as well, can you describe the relationship between your gut health or microbiomes? There's just a lot of research about that, and brain health as well as mental health.
To put it very simply, because I don't think people kind of follow the pathway. You need the nutrients, the minerals in the soil for the plants to absorb them, to manufacture the vitamins. Then we come along, we eat the vitamins and minerals in the plants, or we eat the animals who've eaten the plants. And that's how we get roughly 30 vitamins and minerals. They go into our mouths where digestion begins. If we are taking the time to chew up our food for a while, the enzymes in our saliva start to break down the nutrients. They go into our stomach, into our intestines, and if everything is working well enough, and we can talk about how we all need more fiber and fermented foods, etc. But if it's working well, then those nutrients are taken out of the food. They're absorbed into the bloodstream. What happens then? The bloodstream goes up all over the body, but it especially goes to the greediest organ that you have, which is your brain. So that's the pathway from the soil to the brain. But any weakness anywhere in that chain is a problem. And the microbiome is a problem for lots of people. If people would go to a whole foods diet, they would be eating enough prebiotics. Forget probiotics, prebiotics. I'm not saying they're not important, but for this discussion, prebiotics, which are the fibrous foods which feed the good gut bugs and improve the health of your gut microbiome. So that's something that when you're improving the consumption of your diet toward a Mediterranean whole foods style of diet, you're working on your microbiome, you're working directly on your brain metabolism, etc.
Love it. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. Anything else to add there, Julia?
Yeah, we could talk a long time about this interface between the gut and the brain. There's such an explosion of research in this space. I guess the one thing I'll just contribute here is, again, research from my lab, so I can talk more personally about it. And that is that we looked at the effects of the micronutrients on overall diversity of the microbes that are in your gut. And we found that just with a 10-week intervention with the nutrients of this broad spectrum micronutrients, that they did have an impact in terms of improved diversity. Generally, I mean, we're still in really early days around understanding the impact of different bacteria. And it might come to it just like what we've said around the nutrients, is that there might not be a special bacteria, that we need many of them in combination. While although some of them may be more detrimental to our health than others, but that the diversity does seem to be important, and that the more diverse your microbiome is, that's generally a good thing. So that was really reassuring to see that, and interesting. And we're in the process of seeing whether or not that exists in other populations as well. So I guess that's my little adding in there. But Bonnie talked about the importance of feeding the microbiome and making sure that we are in it, particularly taking in those prebiotics. And I just collaborated on a study where the diet was manipulated to increase exposure to prebiotics, and that did seem to have a positive impact on mental health. So, yeah, Bonnie's looking at me. Yeah, it just got published.
I didn't know this.
Yeah,
okay,
it was a collaboration with Deakin University.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Wow, that's awesome. So in your book, you also mentioned the Hippocrates, or you quote Hippocrates' famous quote about "Let food be thy medicine." But I know you've reworded this, so one of you please share what that wording is?
I do have it there. I'm trying to remember what that one was. I think it was from John Cryan. Do you have it there?
No, I don't. I don't have it there, but it's something about what you absorb.
Yes. Yes. It's not what you eat, but it's what you absorb.
What you absorb, right? Yes.
Yeah.
And the microbiomes help in that whole process of.
Oh, absolutely. It's critical. I don't think a lot of people understand, and that's why I wanted to emphasize that when they eat food, it goes in, the nutrients go into the bloodstream by way of a healthy microbiome. I sometimes in conversations have found people don't get what's the microbiome got to do with my, how does it affect the nutrients in my brain? We need to teach people how these things link together.
Fantastic. Thank you. So, is there anything else to add what people should reduce or avoid when it comes to their diet, their nutrients, and mental health? Go ahead, Bonnie.
I just want to say something about being kind to yourself, Julian. I think you'll agree with this. People sometimes go to extremes right away. They fail and then they beat themselves up about it. And so I think people need to be kind and gentle and take steps that they think they can handle first and not go like, I'm going keto, right? Or something like that. Some of these are very difficult to succeed at, the really restrictive approaches. So go ahead, Julia.
Yeah, no, I was going to say something similar along those lines of not complicating it too much, like a whole long list of the do's and don'ts, because that just makes it complicated to eat. And so it's simple. It's about reducing your consumption of your ultra processed products and increasing your consumption of your real whole foods. And I guess I'd say start, the breakfast as your start of your day. So set it up well and start your day with a good whole food diet, foods, so that because that can have an influence on the rest of your day and hopefully making different choices than you might have made if you started with a really ultra processed start, like, a liquid form of a cereal or something. They have Up and Go here. Is that something that exists in North America? It's awful.
I don't think so.
Well, then you're lucky, but I'm sure you have something very much the equivalent of it.
Yeah.
But as long as cacao is considered a phytonutrient, I'm very happy.
Oh,
yes.
Depends what you add it to.
True. Very true. So I know we're coming down to the final stretch here of our time together. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Any other bits of knowledge that you'd like our listeners to learn about?
I think we've covered a lot. And if your listeners want to know more, there's so many resources out there. I mean, there's the book, of course, The Better Brain. I have done some educational courses that are online. There's a MOOC, which is a mass open online access course through edX platform, which is Harvard platform. And it's free for people to enroll. If they want to, they can pay a little bit more money and get a certificate, but all of the content is available for free. And so if people prefer to digest their information through videos rather than reading a book, then that would be a good place to go and learn more about it. And I continue to develop this kind of online courses so that we can make sure that this information is available nationally and internationally, so that we can hopefully increase the number of people who really get how important it is that you care about the food environment.
Fantastic. And so through that avenue, is that how people can contact you directly? Avenues?
Yes, I'm very contactable and easy to track down, as I've learned over the years. I'm sure Bonnie's the same. Although Bonnie, with your name, is slightly more common than mine.
Yeah, that's the thing. I tell people to go to edX.org and just search for Rucklidge, or go to Amazon and search for Rucklidge, because there's only one, Julia, but there are a gazillion Kaplans out there. So if people wanted to find me, they need to know my middle initial, which is J. So my website is bonniejkaplan.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Again, thank you both so much for your time today and for being part of the summit. We're very excited to learn more about how nutrition can help not only build a better brain, but improve mental health and well-being. And it was invaluable, our time together and all the information which you shared. So thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of our hearts and minds and spirits.
Well, thank you, Lynn, as well, and to the Brick Foundation for all the support that they contribute towards the research on mental health and nutrition.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right.